As I was making the last video about Gunstar Heroes, I realised there was one treasure game that I neglected to mention. Like Guardian Heroes and Radiant Silvergun, it's a game I've never played before, but unlike those games, it's one I could theoretically have got my hands on. It was released in Australia, and it was on a console I owned. The same console, in fact, as Gunstar Heroes. It's Dynamite Headdy. I honestly don't know why I never played it. I was definitely aware of it, and I would gladly have played it if I'd ever got the chance. Most likely I just never got that chance. I lived in a small country town, and if none of the few stores nearby happened to stock a particular game I was interested in, I had no real choice but to shrug and buy something else. But now I'm no longer reliant on poorly stocked chain stores in backwoods towns, so I'm going to take the opportunity to do something I haven't done in a long time. I'm going to thoroughly play a Mega Drive game that I've never played before. There'll be no nostalgia factor in play, apart from the unavoidable nostalgia attached to Treasure and 16-bit platformers in general. What will I make of it? Well, let's find out. Okay, the title screen. My first impulse is to compare it to the title screen of Gunstar Heroes, which I had fond memories of, but actually I'm going to make a concerted effort to not draw comparisons between the two games. Treasure didn't really do sequels, at least not in their earlier years, opting instead to make each new game its own unique creation, so I'll try to treat Dynamite Headdy just like that. Anyway, the title screen is simple but characterful, and introduces the whole puppet stage show element, which is charming in itself. A quick look at the options shows them to be pretty damn bare bones, and I'm kind of worried about the lack of difficulty settings. These days I kind of need to see the word easy before I feel I can proceed with confidence. But hey, it's good to get out of your comfort zone, right? That's what they say anyway. Personally, I'm quite a fan of comfort. So the game starts with a relatively lengthy intro sequence, and again it's hard not to be charmed by the stage show setting. I love the way the backdrops are, well, exactly that. Flat constructions literally dropped in the back. I also love the fourth wall breaking stuff, like the sign that explicitly informs you that this is the opening demo, and the ads for the game itself, not to mention Sega and Treasure. Eventually you get control of Headdy as he tries to escape the clutches of this robot thing. I think it's impossible to actually take damage here, but apparently there is a special bonus if you destroy the robot itself. I do not manage that. When you get to the end of the section, the scenery actually falls on top of you, another little touch I find highly amusing. Now the primary antagonist appears. He's not the ultimate big bad guy, but he is the thing you'll be fighting most frequently as the game progresses. So he looks like a cat, right? Nope, he's a bear apparently. This at least helps make a little more sense of his name, which is Trouble Bruin. That's Bruin spelt B-R-U-I-N, by the way, which is apparently a folk name for a brown bear, not a word in common usage here in Australia. We don't have koala Bruins, which, makes sense as koalas are neither brown nor bears. But I digress, as usual. Anyway, this isn't much of a boss fight, although it is genuinely tricky to avoid taking damage, which is going to become something of a theme going forward. Fortunately, it only takes a couple of hits to send him packing. Up next is a surprisingly awesome tutorial stage. There are 3 doors you can go through, and behind each one is a sort of mini-game that lets you try out the different gameplay elements. The first one lets you experiment with the different types of head you can equip. Being a puppet, Headdy can swap out his head whenever the opportunity presents itself, with each different type of head having different properties. One surrounds you in a shield that damages enemies that get too close, one shoots out sparks that do damage in a wider radius. There are quite a few different types, and they all have their uses. The next minigame lets you practice your main mobility skill, which is using these smiling orange orb things to grab onto so you can pull yourself to higher ground. It's a system that works really well, it's fun and satisfying to get right, and the controls feel responsive and precise. The third and final minigame allows you to practice launching your head at enemies, which is your primary means of doing damage. Again, the controls just feel right, and even in this little minigame I feel like my skills are being enjoyably tested. Of course, it doesn't take much to test my skills, such as they are. In fact, I managed to fail 2 of these minigames first time around. I hope this isn't a sign of how much I'm going to struggle with the actual game. Spoiler alert, it is. In any case, I have to applaud this game's tutorial system. It was rare to see a tutorial of any sort in a game of this era, let alone one that was both fun and useful, not to mention totally optional. Now, finally, the game properly starts. This first real stage is pretty standard platforming fare. It's not too challenging and eases you into what the game expects of you. One of the earliest things you encounter is the first bonus stage, a basketball-style minigame that, honestly, I have no idea how to do properly. There are two machines shooting out basketballs, and maybe if you're suitably skillful you can effectively utilise both of them, but I find it most effective to just stand underneath one and try to keep as many balls aloft as possible until hopefully a few of them randomly go through a basket. I managed to make the required number of shots in this first level, but the quota goes up in the later ones and becomes nigh on impossible with my haphazard strategy. You get an opportunity to mess around with a few different heads here. There's the vacuum head that sucks in everything in a large radius, which is extremely helpful for reaching power-ups in tricky places. There's the winged head, which increases your speed and jump height, as well as the range of your head, which is also very helpful in certain circumstances. And there's the shrinking head, which allows you access to places you wouldn't otherwise be able to fit in, and also avoid certain obstacles. Before too long, the first real boss shows up in the form of a giant wind-up dog made of orbs with wheels. Hooray for Japanese creativity! It's not a difficult boss by any means. All you have to do is avoid or destroy the various objects he drops and hit his tail, while avoiding being crushed under his weight. But, okay, this arrow here, I assume it was telling me where I needed to be in order to be safe? But no, I get hit. Maybe I have to duck? Nope, still get hit. And I'm dead. Okay, it's a mistake I won't make again, but that arrow is kind of ambiguous, right? Or is that just me? Well, like I say, it's not a difficult boss. Apparently, if you collect enough of these blocks that burst from its exploded corpse, you get a continue. That would have been really nice to know, as you start with no continues at all, and only 3 lives. This is going to be a problem, especially since health pickups and extra lives are pretty damn rare, and many of them are quite well hidden. The next boss fight is not super hard either, but it does contain one added frustration. The helpful arrows, which in the last boss fight showed you where you don't want to be, now indicate where you do want to be. If you don't move in the direction they're pointing, you get dragged along the floor or the ceiling or something. Honestly, it's not entirely clear what's damaging you. Fortunately, it doesn't do much damage, so I make it through without many issues, and handily you can restore your health before the next boss. This one's pretty fun, and relatively challenging, at least given my feeble skills. There's not much to it other than avoiding the lower section while doing as much damage as possible to both halves. It's still surprisingly tough, but only takes a little practice to get used to. But then it's immediately on to the main end of level boss, and this time there's no handy health refill. No surprise then that I die immediately. Ultimately though, this boss is fairly easy if you have even the tiniest amount of skill. I, on the other hand, managed to finish it off with my health so low that one more hit would kill me. Up next is a relatively lengthy platforming section, and it's good, it's fine, but it's not great. Maybe my expectations were set a little too high, but this is about as good as the platforming gets in this game, and it's just not enough to make it a classic, at least not to my mind. There are lots of small things that are great, or at least could have been great. There's this tank battle where you're forced to deflect its own bombs back at it. You can switch the directions on these conveyor belts to put your enemies in a better position. There are multiple paths which you can access depending on which head you currently have active. All these things are interesting gameplay elements, but somehow they come together in a way which ends up being less than the sum of their parts. The layout and design of the platforming sections have no real ingenuity to them. Everything seems to have been cobbled together competently enough, but without the care and effort it would have taken to provide a truly compelling playground for the genuinely cool gameplay. Like Gunstar Heroes, and yes, I know I said I try to avoid comparing them, but I might as well fail at that like I do at almost everything else, Dynamite Headdy feels almost like a boss rush mode, except unlike the earlier game, the relatively brief sections between bosses don't add all that much to the overall experience. I wanted to stress that there's nothing wrong with them as such, but there's definitely a lot of unexploited potential here. Anyway, on to the next boss, and, well, it's not the best boss in the game. The only consistent strategy I found was to stay as high as possible and shoot down at the boss when he randomly comes into the middle of the screen. To be honest, for a while I wasn't even sure if you were supposed to kill it. I thought maybe you'd eventually come to the top of the tower and fight him in a place where you don't have to constantly worry about plummeting to your death. But nope, you just continue ever upward, chipping away at the boss's health until he gives up the ghost. The next platforming section is rather cool, but brief. There's a definite rotation theme in this section of the game, from the exterior of the tower in the last bit to the interior here, and it's pulled off damn well given the Mega Drive's technical limitations. This is taken to the extreme with the next boss, which is possibly the best boss in the game, and is another triumph of Mega Drive technology, such as it was. It's a pretty simple fight when you break it down, but it works really well. The boss's attacks are telegraphed well enough that you can avoid them with the right timing, and getting spun into the background adds a new dimension to the fight. Definitely a highlight of the game. There's a space shooter section up next, and yes, I'm going to make another Gunstar Heroes comparison. The shooter section in that game was really well done and felt like a fully fleshed out addition to the game. This one doesn't so much. Again, it's not bad, but it just doesn't reach its full potential. Like the rest of the game, it consists mainly of boss fights, with everything else seeming like kind of an afterthought. The first boss is quite uninteresting, and isn't helped by the fact that it's a real damage sponge. It shoots at you from point blank range, and there's this irritating fog which makes it even harder to avoid its bullets. Not very fun. The next interior section is a little better, but still not super interesting, and with a boss that once again takes more damage to kill than it perhaps should. But the whole section is once again redeemed somewhat by the end of level boss. It's another fun and creative one, and difficult enough to be challenging without being super frustrating. Although it's not all great, what's the point of these squares other than to obscure your vision and make it harder to see the enemy's projectiles? It's just irritating. The designers seem to have given up entirely on coming up with traditional platforming gameplay, as this next little bit is nothing but a straight walk to the boss with no enemies and nothing else other than an opportunity to do another bonus stage, which I don't bother with. The boss itself is another good one. The first phase is simple enough, just get the boss to face away from your female friend and she'll throw keys into its backpack, which is good, I guess. I mean, these are the keys we've been taking from the end of level bosses. I assumed we didn't want the bad guys to get their hands on them, but hey, whatever works. The second phase is tougher, although it gets a lot less tough when you realise that the boss targets your head and only your body takes damage. So if your head is not attached to your body, you're safe, which is really not the way it works in real life. Even knowing this, the timing is tough to get down and takes a fair bit of practice, but it's satisfying to get right. All up, I think this may actually be the boss that took me the longest to kill, largely because of how embarrassingly long it took me to realise that you need to use your head as a decoy. Then there's more platforming with more good elements that remain underexploited, and more bosses, and yeesh, I'm running out of things to say. By this point, I have to admit that my enthusiasm for the game is waning. I always believed I wasn't susceptible to having my opinions altered by nostalgia, but now that I'm playing a game that I have no previous knowledge of, it seems possible that the reason I hold some games in such high esteem, even after a quarter of a century, is indeed largely based on a nostalgia factor. Dynamite Headdy is a fundamentally good game, I can see that, but by this stage I'm not really enjoying it at all. Oh well, there's not too much more, so let's get through these last couple of sections at least. The next boss is a real challenge, and even in my weary state of mind, I can concede that it's a pretty cool fight. You can flip the whole stage vertically by hitting these blue things, and you need to do that regularly in order to navigate the environment and avoid being crushed by the boss. Said boss is only vulnerable in one orientation when it's green, so you need to attack when opportunity presents itself and otherwise focus simply on not being killed. And then a frustrating forced scrolling section and another tough boss, and oh god, I just want this to be over at this point. Fortunately, it soon will be. This at last is the final boss. And it's another good fight, even if I am at my wit's end. It's a little more straightforward than I might have expected. There aren't any phases as such, the boss just chooses from a set of attacks and you have to respond accordingly. You can tell what he's going to do based on the colour of his crystal ball, and then you have a very brief time to pick the head best suited for the upcoming attack. It's not the hardest fight in the game, nor is it the most interesting, but it works well enough. And then, oh thank god, it's over. And honestly, tired of this game as I might be, I still love the little sequence where the set is disassembled and all the enemies and other characters come on for a curtain call. The credits roll, you get your final score, and then you get a chance to enter a secret code. Turns out if I'd bothered with the bonus stages and, actually been good at them, I would have got the numbers that make up this code, but I didn't. So what the code unlocks remains a mystery to me. Well, actually, of course it doesn't, because I have the internet. So do you, presumably, so you may want to go check it out yourself. Or maybe you actually want to play the game to unlock it yourself, in which case I salute you. Okay, now it's time to summarise my thoughts on Dynamite Headdy. Except it's confession time. With the last two games I've looked at, I've used save states mainly as a convenience to make the recording process easier. Well, okay, there were a few points in Echo 2 where I used save states to make it through a tough section, but even then it was mainly because I didn't want to waste too much time recording footage. But with Dynamite Headdy, I found save states to be an absolute necessity. With Gunstar Heroes, I just turned the difficulty down when I realised that things were getting too tough, but no such option exists in this game. So the only thing to do was brute force my way through, saving and loading almost every time I took damage. And this is not the way Dynamite Headdy is meant to be played. I was doing it a disservice. What you're supposed to do, unless you're some sort of gaming god, is try, fail, start again, try, get a little further, fail, start again, over and over until you've mastered the game and can get all the way through with limited lives and continues, if you're even aware that it's possible to get continues, unlike me. So I'm going to give it a go that way. No save states, just me and my minimal skill, seeing how far I can get before I run out of lives. And the answer is not far. The second end of level boss finishes me off. Not great, but now I'm playing the game as a learning experience rather than as a chore I have to force my way through so I can make a video, and it feels a lot better to play this way. It's more fun, more satisfying, and I can actually see myself investing more time in it like this. But I better give it another shot now so I can see how much I actually learned in that first attempt. This second attempt is substantially better. This time I make it to the awesome spinning boss before I'm forced to shuffle off this mortal coil. This is definitely encouraging. Now I'm a doddering old man, I'm not sure I possess the skill to ever finish the game, even now I know about the continues, but I strongly suspect I would have been able to when I was a kid, and more than that, I suspect it's a challenge I would have relished. This might have been a game I came back to over a period of weeks or months, improving a little bit every time until I was able to make it all the way through. Not now though. Now I fear I'm done with this game. Maybe I'll pick it up again at some point, but the odds are against it. I regret that I didn't give it a go when I was younger, when I had more dedication and more patience for playing a game for a couple of hours just so I could learn a little more about the strategy to defeat the final boss. Anyway, now it really is time for my final thoughts, with the caveat that I've not really experienced the game the way I should have. I can at least comment on the graphics and sound, I hope. The graphics are, well, they're stylish, there's that distinctive treasure touch, and like Gunstar Heroes, some of the techniques they've used to create certain visual effects are remarkable. But there's something a little haphazard about the overall visual design. The colour scheme is garish, and while the theatre theme is brilliant, the placement of items is a little too random and messy in my opinion. Even the bosses, which are mostly very well designed from a gameplay point of view, aren't really the pinnacle of visual design, interesting as they might be. As for the music, I really can't say I'm a fan. There are some good tunes, but most of them are unremarkable and some I find downright unpleasant. The Mega Drive has the ability to produce some truly awesome instruments, but the ones chosen for Dynamite Headdy tend towards the shrill side, at least to my ear. Perhaps this is down to the lack of nostalgia I hold for this game, but I'd like to think it's an objective opinion, or at least as objective as an opinion can be. I recently heard the music for Batman and Robin on the Mega Drive for the first time, and it's become one of my favourite 16-bit soundtracks, despite the fact I've never played that game. On the other hand, the gameplay, that is the actual controls and the feel of moving Headdy through the world, is brilliant. The controls are responsive, the jumping has just the right feeling of weight to make you agile but not too floaty, and the head shooting mechanic is just right. In terms of playability, this game is up there with the best 16-bit platformers. It's just a shame they didn't do anything more interesting with the actual platforming side of things, especially when it comes to the head swap mechanics. There was huge potential for a large variety of puzzles and platforming challenges revolving around using different heads, but the game never really lives up to that potential. Yes, there are sections where you need to shrink to get certain items or use the hammerhead to break certain barriers, etc., but there's never any intricacy or ingenuity to it. Despite all this, I can only conclude that Dynamite Headdy is a good game, and one that I would have been very happy to play when it was new, and I wasn't so old. Sadly, those days are long gone. Well, thanks for watching if you have been. Please remember to... Oh god, I can't believe I'm going to say this. Please remember to like and subscribe. Yeesh. I mean, you know whether you want to like and subscribe, right? You don't need me telling you to do it, and nothing I can say is going to make you. I will say though that as a new and tiny channel, even the smallest sign that anyone is interested in what I'm doing has a huge impact and is greatly appreciated. Okay, next time I'm going to be looking at a very different type of game, I think. Until then, get off my lawn.